might have by integrating humans and robots for future NASA space exploration missions. I am at NASA Johnson Space Center, and recently we were kind of tasked to be the center that develops robotic prototypes that will interact with people or with astronauts, not just regular people, they're special people for us. So the first thing I kind of asked myself when I was putting this presentation together was, how will we have robots and humans interacting on future missions? There are lots of different ways that we could have people interacting. There are lots of different robots that we could have on these different missions. And why really do we need to look at social impacts of putting these people and these robots together? Many people at NASA will say, we have procedures, astronauts follow procedures, why do we even need to bother? So, in case you don't know, NASA uses procedures to do everything. There's nothing that gets done unless there's a procedure for it. And people don't do anything unless it's in the procedure. So,
this is scary.
it kind of is. And right now, we have people on space station, and they can call ground control really quickly. But if we're sending astronauts to Mars, they may go off script. I mean, we don't know, but it's human nature that after being confined in a spacecraft for 8 months with zero gravity, you're probably going to throw some procedures out the window. So we do know that there are some things that we don't know as far as humans and robots working together, which is a good thing. I was really happy to find that NASA knows we don't really know all that much about it. And we have a really unique mission that isn't really replicated anywhere else on Earth because of this notion of long distances away from the Earth. You bring in communication latencies, you throw in zero gravity. It's a very unique situation that we can't necessarily take all of the literature and research from human-robot interaction on Earth and just apply it to our own scenario. We may have things that we need to think about that don't really exist for other scenarios on Earth. So, I want to talk a little bit about NASA's current and future missions. We do not have an actual mission, an explicitly funded mission to go to Mars, but most everything we do is looking ahead toward Mars, possibly using the moon as a stepping point to get there. And this image kind of explains how we think we might get there. Some of it might be a little out of date now. In a presidential transition year, things could always change, but this is what most people kind of assume for a actual journey to Mars. So the first phase is over here, and it's what we call Earth reliant. And it really comes down to actually using the International Space Station as a way to test out technology development, to do a lot of science that we think we'll need to get to Mars. And ground control is right there. At most, they're a second and a half away on the phone. So we can really use a lot of people on the ground to help do the things that we do on Space Station. And in the middle here, and this is kind of murky, is what we call the proving grounds. And this is using possibly the moon or an asteroid to actually test things out a little further. We're a little further away from Earth, so you don't have immediate response from ground control. And we could actually do things like have robots on the moon and orbit the moon while crew is operating and supervising these robots to do some of the science. Maybe we have boots on the ground on the moon. It's just, there are different scenarios that we're working through. And everything we do in proving grounds is to get us to what we call the Earth independent phase. And that's where crews go into Mars, they're in their transit vehicle, they are minutes and minutes away and just kind of getting further and further away from ground control. So they really need to be operating autonomously, and the concept of crew autonomy is really big at NASA right now. How do we let crew do everything they're doing on Space Station without help from the ground? Because ground control does a lot of stuff for Space Station. So we really only right now have two different missions that we have robots in operation for. The first being International Space Station. We have two manipulator systems on board. The first is the Space Station Remote Manipulator System, and that is otherwise known as Canadarm2. I will call it SSRMS because NASA loves acronyms. And the other is the Special Purpose Dexterous Manipulator, otherwise known as Dexter to the public and SPDM at NASA. And these arms do all of the heavy lifting up on the space station. They pull out ORUs and replace ORUs, another acronym, orbital replacement units. But they do some interesting things. They also, yes, I have both pictures up here. This top picture is an astronaut doing an EVA, or an extravehicular activity spacewalk, on the end of SSRMS. And then this bottom picture is the SSRMS capturing. I can't tell which one it is right there, but it's either going to be the SpaceX capsule, or the Cygnus capsule, or the HTV capsule from Japan. And those are the cargo vehicles that deliver cargo to the space station. So when the robot's operating in either of these two modes, someone on space station is manually flying that robot. So we don't have any ground control of that. And all they have are joysticks and images coming back from cameras on space station. There's no autonomy. This little video, which is actually an animation, shows the type of control that's done from the ground. Ground control does everything else. And when I found out how they actually operate this robot at NASA, I was kind of stunned. There's weeks of planning every joint move. Right now, they do actually have a simulator that they can run things through, but they still have to come up with all of the joint motions themselves. A very large team of people that are monitoring things when we have an operations period, and there's actually a few people who we call robos that do the operations for the robot.
Do you have any delays?
What?
Delays communication?
So you can get up to about 1.5 seconds of delay, but it's usually less than that, on the order of hundreds of milliseconds. So it's really negligible compared to what we have for our future activities. These are the only robots that are in real operations on space station. Now, we do have a couple of other robots on space station. I saw a presentation about one of them this morning. Robot 2. So Robot 2 is, we now have the actual legs. I'm not sure, I missed this morning's presentation, but we now have legs on the actual robot, so it's no longer on the stanchion.
In the ISS?
On the ISS, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
So Robot 2 is a astronaut assistant type robot that we're putting up there. We're hoping we can learn quite a bit about interacting with the astronauts in a zero gravity type scenario. But we're still working on getting everything checked out so that we can start doing some interesting science. And the Spheres robots are these tiny little free flyers. And those have been used by lots of different groups to do experiments on space station. But these are only experimental robots. So we don't have any real operations going on with them. We don't have a whole lot of science that we've collected on how the crew is interacting with these. So the other mission that has active robots in operation are our Mars rovers. And we have two separate ones. So Mars exploration rovers are Spirit and Opportunity, also called MER. Opportunity is the only one that's in actual operation now. Spirit is like, and the Mars Science Lab, otherwise known as Curiosity, is also on Mars. And I put this video up here because it shows you the operations team. So what happens with these robots is they dump their data down, everyone comes into work, you've got this team of scientists and robot operators and trajectory planners all getting together and planning out what they want to do for the day based on the original plan and based on the data that's come back. And then they send the plane up and they go home and go to bed and they start everything the next day. So that's really the kind of rhythm that you have with these robots. They obviously are not interacting with people on Mars. And the interesting thing here is that Mars is essentially a static environment. So unless some sort of dust storm blows through, things aren't going to change between when you got the data and when you send the plan. You know, we don't have like space monkeys stealing wheels off a robot or changing the configuration of the rocks. So you don't have to really worry about what's happening over that large delay. So these are really the only two sets of operation robots that we currently have. And as you can see, there's not just a whole lot of things we can learn about the robots and humans interacting with each other. However, we do have some different classes of robots we plan on developing for future space missions. And these are the four categories of robots. Something we call caretaker robots. Obviously mobility robots that move people, that move themselves. Human augmentation, which is really focused on making the astronaut crew stronger, giving them the ability to have more stamina, so essentially getting into their suit and putting robotic devices in the suit. And then robotic autonomy, which everyone knows, you know, if we could just make them all autonomous, we wouldn't have any issues. But the two I'd like to focus on for this presentation are caretaker and mobility robots. These are the two that are really going to be interacting with astronaut crew in a way where the robots need to have some autonomy and some intelligence, if you will. So what are caretaker robots? Caretaker robots are robots that we would like to put either on spacecraft that are in transit so that they can maintain the outside of that spacecraft while the crew is inside and do things that we prefer not to have our crew doing before they get to Mars. There are also, we have habitats that we believe will place before crew get to Mars or the moon, and we would like to have those habitats running when the crew get there. So we need something that can actually maintain those habitats, fix things that broke. And that's another class of caretaker robot. And then we also would like for them to be able to do inspections on their own, to be able to move payloads around on a surface. And these are all kind of just some different thoughts of what a caretaker robot could be. So on the left here, we actually have, this is a large robotic crane. And this was tested in field tests, I guess it's some years ago now, to move payloads around. And then here we have the actual Sprint Air Cam, which is a little free flyer that went outside of Space Shuttle, actually. I think this was 1997 when we flew it. And it was an inspection camera. So it flew around the shuttle, took some images, sent them back, and was floating out there with crew doing spacewalks. And then this top picture, and that's my favorite, is, you can't see it very well, and there's a reason for that, is our robot Valkyrie, the bipedal humanoid that we have at JSC, maintaining some rover connections to the habitat. So these are the sorts of things that we think caretaker robots will do. And it's obvious that they're going to be interacting with the human environment, but then we can also have them double as an assistant to the crew when they arrive or while they're in transit on their spacecraft. And then mobility systems are really going to be focused on scouting, going out in scouting areas for science sampling, or also moving what we call regolith on the moon or on Mars to actually build up some radiation protection, to move things around for the habitats. Crew mobility, these are the rovers. These are the little house that the crew will live on when they go out for excursions. And payload mobility robots. So we have, I showed you the crane that can actually move payloads around. But we also have things, prototypes that we've developed. This is Athlete out from JPL that was essentially a mobile habitat. This picture is our Centaur 2 base at JSC, and we've done quite a bit of bulldozing with it. It can also house Robonaut 2 on top of it. It can have lots of different payloads on it. And then this top picture is our space exploration vehicle on the left. And I chose this one in particular because we attached a kind of fake manipulator on the front to do some activity where the crew were inside of this rover and they were using the arms on the front to get samples. So that's something that we've talked quite a bit about, is putting manipulators on the crew rovers so they don't even have to get outside of the rover to do some science sampling. So I want to bring you back to this. We have Earth Reliant, we're working on that, and now we're looking at the types of robots we could build for the second 2 phases. But how do we actually think we're going to have robots and people working together to be successful on these future missions? What does NASA know? So obviously we haven't been able to collect quite a bit of data, enough data for real interaction between humans and robots on space station. What do we know we don't know? Fortunately, NASA has actually started looking at that. And this last point right here is really where a lot of this human-robot interaction, the impacts that could occur, come from. And the Human Research Program has a lot of money at NASA, and they go out and they fund research for all sorts of things for the human crew. And one of the interesting things they've done is they've defined risks that NASA has that relate to the human. And they've created what we call evidence reports that then document these risks. And the one risk that is very interesting, or should be interesting to everyone in here, is what we call our Harvey risk. And this is that NASA has a risk of inadequate design of human and automation/robotic integration, otherwise known as HARI. I don't actually agree with the fact that they put robotics and really what is autonomous systems in the same category. I think there's a big difference there when we're looking at some embodied robot and then autonomous systems that can't actually interact with the people. But that's just kind of obviously, because we are at a robotics conference, I'm going to focus on the robotics aspect of this. But this is the actual definition of that risk. And I'd like to I'm just going to read it to you and point out what blows my mind. Given that automation and robotics will seamlessly integrate with crew, and given the greater dependence on automation and robotics in the context of long-duration spaceflight operations, there is a risk that systems will be inadequately designed, resulting in flight and ground crew errors and inefficiencies, failed mission and program objectives, and an increase in crew injuries. So all of a sudden now, NASA is actually saying we've got a risk that if we start putting robots and humans together, we're going to start injuring people, which is kind of scary to think about. But we know that's a risk. And these risks all have what we call gaps that are associated with them. And we have 4 gaps that are associated with this particular risk. So, and this really, I think, is the kind of, this is where all the meat is in our risks. We need to evaluate, develop, and validate methods and guidelines for identifying human robotic task information needs, function allocation, and team composition for future long-duration, long-distance missions. And this kind of captures the majority of things that we really need to focus on for integrating humans and robots. So first off, we need to figure out what the task information needs are. And that means, what data do the robots need to do their job? What data does the human need to supervise that robot or to operate that robot? We don't have a really good definition of the smallest amount of data. Are we okay with a single image coming back from a robot to give an astronaut enough information to operate it? That's kind of how we operate right now with Space Station Arm, but is that good enough? So this is something that we need to actually be putting some research funding into to find out exactly what information we need for everyone to have. Okay, secondly, function allocation. This essentially means who needs to be doing what. And this is tricky because astronauts want to do everything. They don't want robots doing anything for them. Although I have talked to a few who are very excited about the prospect of a robot that sets up their EVA platforms, which apparently take almost an hour, and then takes them down. So essentially, the robot's coming in and taking care of them, and they get to do the interesting stuff. But who should be doing the different tasks that you've assigned to a mission? You need to look at whether or not astronauts will be safe. If they are doing EVA, if they're out floating around their spacecraft, there's always a chance that their suits will be hit by micrometeorites. And if it's large enough, they're exposed to vacuum space. If your robot is a little brittle or a little unreliable, then you may have an issue where the human doesn't want the robot doing a task. So function application is a really vast area to be looking at, and especially if you don't know all the tasks that you're going to need done, NASA will try to think of everything that should be done on a mission, but you can't guarantee that. So function allocation is definitely an area that we need to be looking into further for human-robot teams. And then the team composition. So you've got robots. You may have robots that are already on Mars. You may have people who are on Earth who can do some control and supervision. You've got people flying through space, or maybe they're already on Mars or on the moon. What does your team need to consist of? Do you really need a robot to do certain tasks? Do you really need ground control to be involved in something? So these three areas are really kind of core to the gaps, well, they are the gaps that we have, but they're core to how we could actually have some social impacts with the crew when we start integrating humans and robots. Okay, so second gap. This is all about, we are going to have, this is really comes from team composition. We're going to have distributed, non-co-located teams. They will be composed, hopefully, of robots and people. We are going to have lots of different communication latencies that we find from whether we've got ground control or the crew is maybe only a minute away round trip from Mars, but then in another month they're 3 minutes round trip away. How do you actually develop design guidelines for the robots that you're going to include on your missions, and for how this team will all interact to ensure mission success? So, and it's also about the interfaces that you give your operators. Well, I mean, is giving someone Microsoft HoloLens, or it's version number 6 by the time we get to Mars. Is that how you want your astronauts interacting with these robots? Do we just give them joysticks and images like we currently have? So these are the things that we don't know, and we know that we need to design guidelines, or we need design guidelines to ensure mission success for these human-robot teams. This is a big one. It didn't seem very big to me when I first was working with folks that created this evidence, of course, but we don't know how to quantify the performance of a human-robot team for space. What are the metrics that we need to be using? I know that the HRI community has been publishing, and they've kind of been coalescing around metrics, but are these going to be good enough for us? Do we need to look at other metrics that may not have been considered? And then how are we actually going to measure the team performance? So who's to say whether or not a team was successful on a certain task? If the task was just done, but you've really made the astronaut cranky and angry because the robot took 4 hours to do it, then you've got a problem. So how are we going to measure the tasks that we have robots and people doing? And then I kind of feel like number 4 is a bit redundant. This is really about mission activities and tasks. It kind of goes along function allocation, but it's what tasks do we actually need to be doing with these human-robot teams to make the mission successful. And essentially, NASA wants to do the least amount of activity to ensure mission success, because then you're bringing down risk. And NASA is all about bringing down risk. So how do we figure out what the activities and tasks are on our missions that we want robots and humans doing together? And this is kind of, I mean, that could just be a general question in life. What kinds of activities do you want humans and robots doing together? So I thought about this and thought, what are the social impacts that these gaps have? What if we don't close all of these gaps? What if we think we've closed the gaps with certain answers? Maybe we have a set of metrics that we decided we're going to use to measure human-robot interaction performance. The first one is trust. So, and I've also talked to quite a few astronauts about this, about, you know, how would you feel best about interacting with robots? What kinds of things would you be okay with robots doing? How would you like them integrated? And they always say, I'll do whatever, but if I don't trust that robot, then I'm not going to do anything with it. And trust actually kind of then informs, it comes from a lot of different things. And this is really anecdotal, but these are the sorts of issues that could be caused from not having these gaps closed and not bringing the risk down on human-robot teaming. So, reliability. If crew members don't think they're going to get the same performance out of a robot over and over again, they're going to shove it in the closet, or, I don't know, push it out the airlock. Oh, these got a little out of order there. Safety. Safety is a very big one. If they think the robot's going to hurt them or will cause damage to the environment or cause damage to the spacecraft, they're not going to trust this robot and they're going to want to put it in their closet. Usability. And this really, I think a lot of usability will come from ground control that is having to monitor and supervise these robots from way far away. How usable is the robot? If their interfaces don't let them use the robot to its highest potential, then we've probably failed and we're wasting money and we're increasing risk. So the robots need to be usable in their human-robot team framework. Efficiency. And this kind of goes along with reliability. I think we've all watched robotics competitions, and we all know that robots are really, really slow. So now, I'm thinking by the time we actually get to Mars, robots won't be that slow. I'm hoping. But if a robot takes 20 times as long as a crew member to do a task, even if that crew member sees in their procedures, you have to wait until the robot finishes its task, it is highly likely that they are going to go off script and do what the robot's supposed to be doing. So we need to make sure that there is some efficiency to the robots that we're putting into these teams and that we don't cause the crew to put them in the closet. Robustness. So if we provide fragile robots as part of the team, or robots that are really good at one thing but aren't good at some of the other tasks they've been assigned, then again, crew's going to get a little itchy about having a robot that could be a little fragile for some of the tasks that have been assigned to them. And then this one, I think, is one that people don't think about a lot. Adaptability. How can we provide robots that will not just do one function? So right now, the space station arms, the only reason that they are adaptable for being able to do spacewalks, putting crew on the other spacewalks, and being able to capture free flyers, and being able to move things around the space station, is because we can actually adapt their end effectors to do all of these things. And I believe we put a few more cameras up there too once we started, once we sent the SPDM up. So is your robot adaptable to different scenarios, or do you have to have something that's actually there for one reason, and then you need another robot to integrate with the team for another reason? And this is, this is one of those things, we develop humanoids. humanoid robots at JSC. That's one of the types of robots that we prototype. And people always ask, why humanoids? Why humanoids? I mean, they are hard and they're difficult, but they are the same form as the person. And if we build an environment for our crew members, then we should be able to adapt a bipedal humanoid to that environment, or a climbing humanoid to the same environment that the human's in. So the robot can be much more adaptable, and then all of a sudden you're able to allocate tasks to it that you wouldn't be able to allocate to some other type of robot. So how are we going to close these gaps? And this is where I'm going to sell to you, and sell to you to go back and tell all the people you work with at universities. Solicited funding calls are probably where we're going to get the most research and work. And I put this up, the NSBRI, oh, I should have spelled that out. It doesn't really matter because it's done at the end of the fiscal year. It's the NASA Space Biomedical Research Institute, and I believe we have asked for a new, Rice University in Houston ran this institute, or runs it, and they are actually coming to the end of their contract at the end of this fiscal year in September. And I believe we had called out for a new research institute, but this is where anything related to crew gets funded for the greater research community. And I actually know of someone who has some human-robotic interaction work that's funded through the NSBRI. The Hero Call, again, I should have spelled that out. So the Hero Call is really the human research program's funding solicitation for getting research dollars. And these can all be found at the Inspire's website, which is where NASA puts out all of its solicitations. So you may want to, if you're not already getting emails from Inspire's, go get it. We're also looking, we've had some workshops on different areas from the Human Research Program, but this is having workshops to get people together, like here, to talk about how we can go about closing these gaps. Is another way that we'd like to get the gaps closed. And then technical interchange meetings, these are essentially just NASA meetings. And we used to have a lot more than we have right now. Travel funding can get a little dicey sometimes with the federal government. But this is essentially a workshop type event, but it's less about people presenting their research and more about getting a bunch of folks in the room who have some experience in different areas together, and then providing like a white paper at the end of the TIM or a report on what you discussed. So I'd like to leave you with this. Oh, I don't think it plays on that. There we go. So this is Roadmap 2 on Space Station. You can tell there's a dude floating up top. Is it playing?
I think you can click it one more time. There we go.
And this is really kind of the first real physical human-robot interaction that we did on Space Station. It's just robot shaking a hand with an astronaut, but this is so cool. So, I mean, you can imagine if we can figure out how to do this right, then we've essentially added crew members to these future exploration missions, which then, you know, we're getting a lot more bang for our buck, because robots, we can create lots of them. They don't have the cost of people in many ways. If they stop working, well, then we lose some ability to do some tasks, but they're not people. But at the same time, we can create another crew member for all of these missions. But you know, this is where we have a lot of work to do at NASA in order to integrate robots with people for these missions, so that we actually have successful missions. And we're starting to get on our way. But we're still stuck in that first phase of how do we actually do this. So that's about all I have. I hope that I gave you some new insight into where NASA is as far as human-robot research. I find a lot of people don't know about these evidence reports in the robotics community because they're done by the human factors folks. And unless you've got a good foothold into that area, you might not know about these. So hope you go check them out and start proposing proposing some really cool research to us, because that's how we're gonna get this done.
Time for questions?
And feel free to ask me anything about NASA and robots.
Okay, I realize these distributed, non-co-located teams are different, but are you folks looking at swift trucks as well, the original swift truck? Maybe something to glean from there that's just a little different
Yeah,
than trucks, so that's something.
Swift trucks.
Swift trucks, yeah. And look at the original,
What is that?
the non-co-located.
Okay.
You have to bring this together.
Yeah.
And move it. You have, a body of literature there.
Okay.
So that can be helpful.
I'll go back, chat with my
Okay.
evidence report writers.
Right, that's something.
Yes.
Hi, so this actually isn't directly related to that, but you said we could ask you about anything with robots and NASA. Are you guys still doing anything with like your tumbleweed robots on the Mars surface?
I don't know anything about tumbleweed robots on the Mars surface. Are you talking about the tensegrity robots?
I don't think so.
Okay.
This was kind of like a while ago. I kind of did my master's on it, that's why I kind of even know about it. Because
Okay.
I don't really think there was a whole lot of movement with it. But I mean, basically, either the inflatable balls or whatever that had like lab on a chip net technology or something like that that would be like released into the surface of Mars and they would just kind
Yeah.
of
So those ideas are still always in possible future missions, but I don't know of anybody who's actively working on that right now. And actually, some people at JSC were involved in that when I first started at NASA. So I think that activity died down a while ago.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
I'll ask you a question. So you said at the beginning of the talk, part of the problem was that there's just not a lot of data on what kind, how robots work together, what works, what doesn't work. Just wondering if maybe deep sea exploration, maybe more data even to robots.
That is actually, what's interesting is deep sea has the same problem as us.
Okay.
They currently, if they want to get far enough, they have this very large communication latency. And they have a very stubborn attitude, I would say. Oil and gas is really where that's funded from. And oil and gas it pushes back on new technology. So all their ROVs are operated by complete experts. And then when they have to go down far enough, then they lose their direct comm. And so all of a sudden they've got this communication latency. And we have quite a bit of integration between sea and space. And there's a deep space conference that goes on in Houston that gets the oil and gas people together with the space people. And I think we have a lot that we could do together, but I don't know that there's a whole lot to learn from them just yet. Yeah. Yes.
Do you think that NASA, which is using now robots for exploration, for instance, in the surface of Mars, it might change the culture soon and go from explorers to builders and maintainers of systems? Is that something that could happen anytime soon, or is really way in the future?
So, well, you just asked me two different questions there.
Right.
I think it's way in the future.
Okay.
But that is, I think, where we want to go, having robots do the building up. And, there's concepts of having 3D printers that can build materials out of lunar regolith or Mars regolith. And so then you have robots that are already there on Mars that are taking the 3D printed materials and building up habitats. So it's definitely an idea that is being tossed around. I've seen people propose it quite a bit.
Right.
But as far as when it'll happen, I think we're pretty far away from it. Because right now, it's all
Right.
about the funding
For instance,
exploration.
is Valkyrie a maintenance robot, or is
Valkyrie
a
would be a
builder?
caretaker
Is a builder,
robot.
or
Yes.
okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
She's definitely something that we see maintaining structures
Okay.
and repairing items when things break.
Makes sense.
And really doing that, maintenance crew activity
Mhm.
so that the crew, who are gonna be the most expensive people we've ever had in, the
Ever.
history of ever, so that they can do the science. Because that's what, we wanna get them away. Right now, it's something like 60% of the time that crew is on space station, they're doing maintenance activities.
Right.
And it just is continuing to increase and increase. The space station is starting to get a little old. So we want them doing science. We don't want them doing maintenance activities, things that we can have robots doing because it's the same over and over again. So that's really where we'd like to go with our robots, for future exploration.
So you just mentioned integrity robot. Actually, I'm part of the integrity project.
Oh,
So,
okay.
can you comment on the protection
On the,
integrity?
I don't know a whole lot about it. I know Vitas Sunspiral at Ames, who really has kind of pioneered this. And I think it's more about a novel method for moving things around on a surface. And I don't know if everyone here knows about integrity robots. I can't explain it. You could probably explain it better. But it's kind of this multi-actuator system that rods and strings, so no wheels at all. No actual rotating actuators that move the robot. It's literally rods and strings pulling and pushing. So it's pretty interesting work that's getting quite a bit of traction actually out of Ames Research Center.
What about human augmentation?
So, I know, I left that out because, I mean, that's a very different topic, I think, than interacting, wearing the robot is something that is quite different than just talking to the robot or supervising a robot somewhere. And that's really, we have a different group at JSC that does that work, but so far we have, we've developed a glove that it's called RoboGlove, and it uses Robonaut hand technology inside of this glove. And we worked on this with GM because they were interested in having people who were working on their manufacturing lines. They were getting a lot of carpal tunnel issues, and so the RoboGlove was developed so that they could actually hold things for a long period of time in very odd ways without hurting themselves. And we thought, okay, we could put this in a spacesuit glove because pressurized spacesuits are really hard to operate in. Robonaut 2 is much more dexterous than a person in a pressurized suit. So we were thinking if we could actually get into the suit and then actuate the suit, we could help the crew out because then they can lock their fingers into place when they're holding a teeny tiny wrench with their pressurized glove. So that's one of the things we've been looking at actively, but there's also the notion of putting exoskeletons into the suits so that they would be able to go out and do a much longer spacewalk than they otherwise would be able to. And also, it's interesting, they apparently, in the spacesuits they have now, there is a lot of chafing and blistering, and they lose fingernails and they lose toenails. So, I mean, just moving around in that thing is really difficult, and any help they could get in the suit would be useful. So that's really where we're focusing on human augmentation. There's also some talk about augmenting the human cognitively, which is really we don't have a lot there yet, but we're looking into this. And actually, Jeff Norris out of JPL, who I think is still at JPL, has been doing a lot of really interesting work with getting into some virtual reality gear and allowing Mars scientists to look at different areas together. It's very cool work. But that's really where we're going with human augmentation.
Is this like a secondary priority or is already a primary concern?
It's one of those 4 concerns. Our principal technologist in robotics at NASA has listed these as kind of our 4 focus groups for robotics for future missions. So it is one of the 4 areas. And I would say, it's a primary area we're looking at.
We have one last question here.
So in NASA's definition, robot is a part of spaceship or new type of astronaut.
Both?
Because in
It is,
So, but
Until you put a person on the end of it.
Yeah, maybe the robonaut is, I don't know.
so, I wanna be careful about saying another astronaut. Like, we literally, I've had astronauts say to me, oh, so you're trying to take away our jobs? I'm like, no. Have you seen a robot move? I mean, really, I'll give you a demo and we'll see. No, it's not taking away our jobs. But that's, you know, we don't wanna take away, there is a place for, in my opinion, and I think NASA's, manned space exploration. Getting people out there is not like getting robots out there. Robots can do a lot of the science, but they can't really give us the human element. So we're not trying to create robotic astronauts. We would like to create robots that are assistants to astronauts and that help them do their job better.
All right. Oh.
Just one moment. Because in our astronauts need to trust the space or specificity. I don't know what's the difference of the specific and a robot. So the meaning of trust.
Well, I mean, I think they both are gonna have the same issues. It's just the spacecraft is gonna have to magnify that much more. But the spacecraft can't necessarily interact in the astronaut's environment. Now, it may be the astronaut's environment, in which case, got a different scenario, but they can't actually, you know, autonomous systems on a spacecraft can't, well, I guess how 9,000, that's a different thing, but they can't reach into the astronaut's world and start doing things. So they can't, you know, interact with the environment. And I think, you know, I don't know, I'm not an astronaut, so I can't really say, but I think those are probably two different areas, but with a lot of overlapping concerns.
Okay, thank you.